Hi, everybody. My name's Eddie. I'm a conflict mediator, trainer, and consultant based in Montreal, Canada. And I am the founder of EJH Conflict Management. I've been doing conflict management work for about 7 years now. And I really wanted to take a moment to share my story a little bit with you, more so not how I started the company, but how I decided that it was time to change the way that I managed conflict in my life. Like when I realized that I was doing it in a unhealthy way, in a way that was not adding to my life, but was like actively hurting my life, hurting my relationships. And when, I had that moment of like, I need to do something, something has to change because the way I'm currently doing it isn't right. So I hope this will help shed some light on my intentional conflict practice framework, because that's the framework that I use in my work with my clients. And the intentional conflict practice framework is all about responding to conflict with intentionality, with an outcome, with a purpose in mind, with the goal being that we participate in higher risk conversations or negotiations when we are actually able to be present, when we are not activated, right, or triggered beyond levels that we can control. Because in those moments, we're actually falling back into patterns of behavior that don't actually necessarily help us. It's just what's most accessible or comfortable, or what we're used to, essentially. It's like a habit, or this like response that our body does when it's triggered. It falls back into those patterns. So the intentional conflict practice framework is all about making use of an outcome and a purpose, and then asking ourselves what behavior then, right, or action is going to get me to that place and get me that outcome that I want. So the story that I'm going to share with you today is really about how I came to realize that I needed a framework like this. And then I created this framework, but it was really based off of, having a lot of conflicts that didn't go well. So definitely I wasn't always in this place. But essentially my kind of aha moment, as we could call it, was probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And it's funny because even just today I got like a Facebook memory with like a person that I had a pretty bad conflict with, and our friendship kind of ended. And so I was like, oh, I guess it is about 8 or 9 years at this point. But anyway, so around 8 or 9 years ago, probably closer to 9, I had a series of pretty devastating conflicts. 3 in particular that I can think about. One with a friend, one with a roommate, and one with like a best friend. And I'm not going to go into the details of those conflicts today. Like, I'm not going to talk about what happened, or I'm not going to talk about what they did, what I did. I'm not going to go into those details, but I am going to talk about how they impacted my life. So they all like didn't happen at the same time. There was definitely like a progression. They were like in a series. So they were like, pretty close to each other, in probably, a year, 6 months to a year. My memory is not crystal clear because it was a while ago. But they really disrupted my day-to-day life. And maybe this is something that is familiar to you, because anyone who's had a pretty bad conflict that has resulted in a friendship ending, or any type of relationship ending or having to drastically change, knows how devastating they can be, and the grief that comes with those losses. So for me, it really upended and like changed my day-to-day life. I was really cycling through a lot of emotions. So one minute I would be really hurt and devastated, but I wasn't ready to admit that. So then I would go from hurt and devastated to really angry. And, how could these people do this to me? How could they say this thing or act this way after, all that we had been through? Or in some cases it didn't say anything and, just kind of left. So yeah, I would definitely teeter back and forth between those two. And then I had a lot of anxiety. I had so much anxiety because I didn't really know what was going to happen. Were we going to resolve things? Were we going to be friends? Was the friendship over? Was the relationship over? Was I going to have to move? What was going to happen was unclear. So definitely was cycling through a lot of emotions and then also feeling really unsure about the future. It definitely, I was working somewhere at the time, so it was impacting that. It was impacting my ability to be present at my job, to do my job well. It was impacting my other relationships because communities are small, people know each other, so anything that impacted these relationships was also kind of having impacts on other people that I knew and other people that I was friends with as well. And obviously it was also, causing me to want to talk a lot about it. So they were hearing a lot about what I was going through as well. And I mean, they were really great to me. I got to say, they really did what friends should do. And listen and provide, some clarity, and be there for me. But it was around this time that when I saw how much it was impacting me, and how much it was affecting my day-to-day life, that was kind of when I realized that this doesn't seem right. And also, wanting to learn a little bit why I was behaving the way I was behaving, right? So all of these emotions really repressing my pain and moving to anger instead. But then also having these reactions and responses of if I just talk to them, if I just do this, it'll fix it. And that's what I now call this rush to fix instinct of just wanting to protect yourself and wanting to kind of have the conflict go away by just doing anything, talking to the person, just explaining one more time. And a lot of the time what ends up happening in those moments is we cross boundaries, right? We make people talk to us when they've asked for space. We try to control the narrative, so we post things online to kind of tell our side of the story, definitely things that I did. And it's not always helpful. Often it is not, right? Crossing someone's boundary is never helpful. Trying to control the narrative is often not really useful in conflict resolution. It's about you, right? It's not about the other person. It's not about learning each other's stories or understanding what each other are thinking or needing or feeling. So it was definitely around this time that I opted to look into therapy and got a therapist, a few before finding one that I was going to stay with for a long time, but definitely starting to think about why do I act this way? Why does conflict have such an impact on me? And it was now I've been in therapy for many, many years. And in that time I've been able to look at why do I have the instincts that I do? Why do I react the way I react? What did my family do? What was growing up in, my family like? Also looking at, my ancestry and my lineages, what did the people in my lineage go through and experience? And learn a lot about the nervous system, learning a lot about the psychology of and the physiology of conflict, which I now also share in my work that I do with my clients, because it was really only when I started to actually understand what conflict, what it was doing to my brain, what it was doing to my body, that I was able to finally start making choices, start making decisions, one, about how I was going to act and how I was going to approach conflict. but also like how I was going to make choices about how I was going to engage, right? Learning that what boundaries I needed to have. Because really at that point it was pretty boundaryless, like I mentioned earlier, that really intense desire to need people to approve of you, to like you, to not be angry at you. That's very much a like people pleasing mentality. It's a conflict avoidant mentality. And often people who do that, right, they don't express a lot of their own needs. And if you don't have any boundaries, then you're also not very likely to respect the boundaries of other people because you're not really good at boundaries as a concept. And that's not, no shade on anybody who's watching this video and is thinking that that's what they do, right? Like I'm sharing this because I want people to know that you're not alone in your struggle. Conflicts are really difficult. They're really emotionally taxing. There can be a lot of grief involved. And one of the things that really helped me in bettering my practice and becoming intentional and actually creating a conflict practice, because when I work with clients, that's what I do, is we help you develop your intentional conflict practice, which doesn't necessarily have to look like mine. The whole point is that it's just intentional and it's helping you get to where you want to be. And you're kind of like, how I say, driving the car instead of like the conflict driving you, and making you behave in ways that maybe don't actually align with what your values are. Because when we're triggered, when we're activated, we're not often acting in alignment with our values. And it takes so much work to be able to kind of live in that alignment and embody our values. That's not an easy thing. And definitely, when I was having these conflicts with people, I was not living my values at all. Part of the work that I did in kind of this like self-discovery process was really to think about how I behave in conflict as well, because that's one thing I can control. I can't control what other people are going to do, which is what I was trying to do. I was trying really hard to control their, the thoughts they had of me, the perception they had of me, the story that they had about our conflict. But I can't control that, right? And so in this self-discovery process, I really started to focus more on, well, I can control what I do, and I can control my behavior, and I can control my boundaries, how I relate to someone, the type of relationship that I have with someone, how much I invest into a relationship, how much I invest into myself, how I pursue self-accountability. Those are all things that I can control. And so really I decided that that's what I was going to focus on. That was going to be my focus in this particular part of my journey. And I would really encourage that being the first step for most people, is like really doing that self-discovery piece. Because if we don't know how we are in conflict, if we don't understand what we're like, we can't really do much to improve, right? We're going to continue to focus on what other people are doing. And like I said, that's not the most helpful, because you're not actually able to control what anybody does or what anybody says. We can have influence, of course, but you're going to have way more power and influence over what you can do. So, in my course that I'm currently working on, my intentional conflict practice framework course, one of the first pieces really is that going inward piece and self-discovery piece of really learning about the physiology and the psychology of conflict, understanding how it shows up in our bodies, what it looks like, and then doing some work around thinking about, is this you? Like, how is it showing up for you? And learning what we are actually like, and starting to be able to identify our triggers and our behaviors when we are triggered, and the conflict styles that we tend to fall back on when we are in those states. Because it's only after we do that that we move on to the next piece, which is actually learning about the intentional conflict practice framework, and then being able to start creating our own practice and determining what that's going to look like, and learning how we put it into practice in our day-to-day when a conflict arises. So that's kind of a bit of my journey. I hope it was helpful to hear. I hope it was relatable. I mean, I'm not done my journey. I'm always trying to get better, and I'm just human. So I can, regress just like anybody. Nothing is linear really in this world. But I just wanted to share kind of what I needed to happen in my life, which was some pretty devastating conflicts, to really realize that, like, I don't want things to be this way. And since conflict is inevitable and it's going to happen, I don't want it to impact my life, like, in the ways that I'm letting it impact. And I can safely say that, definitely 8 years, 9 years later, my life has significantly improved. Obviously, conflicts still happen in my life, but my relationships are absolutely different. And I am so much more in control, not necessarily about, how I am in conflict. There's certain things we can't control. Obviously, I get defensive sometimes. I can get reactive, absolutely. But in terms of how I can show up in conflict, how I can be accountable to others and to myself, and how I can be intentional about how I want to approach my relationships, and the decisions I make, right? Focusing on where I have influence and where I have control, and then really letting go in areas that I don't have control in. Like, it's really changed my life. If these are areas that you would like support in, you're always welcome to get in touch. I offer free consultations, right? You get a free 30-minute consultation your first time meeting with me, to talk about if we would be a good fit for either a training that you want to schedule, a coaching session, a mediation that you need support in, and soon in the future, an online course that will be available. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.